Alright, welcome to another video. So today I want to cover my top tips to shooting landscape photography. Landscape photography is a style of photography that can take the most planning and prepping, but when you get that shot, it's definitely one of the most rewarding. On top of that, it's a great way to make money with your photography. So before we jump into my top tips to capturing beautiful landscapes, let's quickly cover the 3 most common ways we can make money with this style of photography. So number 1 is stock photography. So the 2 best sites to do this is Shutterstock and Getty Images. I've linked them below if you're interested in checking them out. So this can be a very lucrative way to make money with your photography if you're taking beautiful landscapes. Also, if you're taking photos of famous places around the world, this can really help sell these images. Okay, the second way to make money is by selling prints. So this one is something that has been very successful for me, and it's something I believe all photographers should offer on their websites, especially landscape photographers. And lastly is client work. So in my experience, if you have a lot of great landscape photography in your portfolio, there is a much higher chance of you scoring travel campaigns. So for example, I went on a recent trip around Yamanashi, Japan, which is the area most famous for Mount Fuji. And on this holiday, I just went out and snapped a bunch of photos and posted these images onto my Instagram. When posting, I made sure to tag a bunch of large travel pages and tourism boards. And just from that, I was able to score a paid travel job from this tourism company in Japan. So there is a lot of opportunities in the landscape photography space. So now let's cover my top tips so you can start capturing beautiful landscapes. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about the gear I recommend for landscape photography. So number 1, if possible, I recommend using a full frame camera over a crop sensor. And I recommend this because, like I've mentioned in a previous video, you are able to fit more into your frame with a full frame camera because of the larger sensor size. And this can be so crucial when taking landscape photos because we want to capture as much of the scene as possible, and sometimes we won't have the freedom of just moving back to capture more in our frame. Okay, moving on to number 2, and that is lens choices. So traditional landscape photographers use wider angles like 24mm and below because it's believed to be the best for landscape photography. And this is something I do agree with, but I also recommend landscape photographers to also use tighter focal lengths. So something like 85mm and above. And I recommend this because this will allow you to capture more details and accents of a location. So personally, I use a 14 to 24mm lens from Sigma, but I also bring my 70 to 180 telephoto lens, and I bring this whenever I'm doing landscape photography. And as you can see in this example, when we mix the wider focal lengths with the tighter detail shots, we are able to engage our viewers even further, while also telling more of a story within our landscape photos. So a lens I see a lot of beginners use to take landscapes is a 50mm, and personally this isn't something I recommend because 50mm is a quite neutral focal length where it's not wide enough to fit everything in the frame, and it's also not tight enough to capture the details. Alright, the next piece of equipment I highly recommend if you're wanting to really focus on landscape photography is a circular polarizer lens filter. This one isn't a must, but it is a piece of equipment that can come in handy for all types of photography, but this is something that can really help take your landscape photography to the next level. So firstly, a circular polarizer is designed to remove or control reflections from surfaces like water, glass, leaves, skies, buildings, streets, and etc. So these CP filters can also enhance the colors in your shots, and the difference can be very noticeable, as you can see in these 2 photos. The polarizer I use is from Moment, and personally for the price, I think it's one of the best out at the moment. But if you are looking for a cheaper option, there are some from Tiffin or Newer that work okay, but just keep it in mind that some of the cheaper filters can cause this X to appear in your images. Alright, now the last piece of gear I recommend is a tripod. And personally, tripods aren't my favorite piece of equipment, but they do serve an important purpose. So personally, I use the Manfrotto B3 tripod because it's sturdy enough for my heaviest camera setup while also being light and portable. With that being said, I've left links to all the gear I use and recommend in the description below, so if you're interested, definitely check that out. Okay, now let's move over to the camera settings. So the main settings you want to keep an eye on when shooting landscape photos is number 1, your aperture, and then your shutter speed. So in most cases when shooting landscapes, you'll want to use as high of an aperture as possible. So personally, I try to keep my aperture to a minimum of f5.6, but depending on the lighting, I will increase this if possible. And we want to use a higher aperture because we want to ensure our depth of field is as deep as possible, which will ensure as much of our scene will be in focus. So whenever I shoot landscapes, I'm always adjusting my exposure by first setting my ideal aperture, then I'll set my shutter speed and ISO depending on two different scenarios. So scenario number one, if I'm shooting handheld, then after adjusting the aperture, I will adjust the shutter speed to a number that I'm confident in still getting a sharp photo with no camera shake. And if the image is still too dark after setting my shutter speed, I will increase my ISO to ensure my image is exposed correctly. Now scenario number two, if I'm using a tripod, then after adjusting my aperture, I will make sure my ISO is at the lowest possible number, which for most cameras will be ISO 100. Then I'll lower my shutter speed to whatever number I need to expose my image correctly. And because I'm using a tripod, I don't have to worry about any camera shake being caused from the slow shutter speed. So that's a big reason why I recommend having a tripod on standby whenever you shoot landscapes. Okay, now we have covered the gear and settings for landscape photography, but now let's talk about the creative things we can do to make our landscape photos stand out from the crowd. So number one is placing a subject in your landscapes. So by placing a person in your landscapes, we are able to tell more of a story within our images. Plus, it can help engage and create relevancy for our viewers. Also, by placing a subject in negative space, we are able to showcase the scale of our environment and add balance to our images. Okay, number two is using foreground elements. So like we've discussed before, it's so important to create depth in our images, and it's no different for landscape photography. So when you're out shooting at a location, you need to be observing the area and seeing if there's anything we can put in front of our lens to help create some more depth in our images. So for example, in this shot, I took a Mount Fuji, and all I did to create this was I placed these autumn leaves in front of my camera lens. Alright, moving on to creative tip number three, and that is don't forget the details. So as we touched on a little earlier, it's so important to capture the details of a landscape. And this is something I see a lot of beginners not take advantage of. And yes, when shooting landscapes, it's super important to get that wide, stunning money shot. But when we mix that with tighter detail shots of a location, it can really help engage our viewers even further. So for example, with these photos I took at the Jewel Changi in Singapore. So as we can see, we have the wide shot in the middle that was taken with a 14mm. Then on the left, we have a medium angle shot, which was taken at 35mm. And on the right, we have a detail shot, which was taken at 100mm. So if we were to remove these two images, we as the viewers can instantly feel less connected to the location. And nowadays, thanks to Instagram's carousel function, we are able to post up to 10 different images into one single post. So this opens up the flexibility to showcase different angles and focal lengths of a certain location, which can help engage our viewers and help tell more engaging stories within our photos. So the next time you're out shooting landscapes, don't forget the details. Okay, now moving on to the last tip, and that is to shoot during the golden hours of the day. So this means shooting our landscapes during sunrise or sunset, because the lighting during these times of the day are a lot softer and vibrant, which will allow for more opportunities to capture some eye-catching landscapes. So you may have to do some prior research and preparation before visiting a location to see where the sun is going to be, but this is something that's definitely worth it in the end. Alright, so that wraps up my top tips for shooting landscape photography. I hope you found some value from this video, and if you're interested in improving your photography skills and learning my top 3 secrets to creating professional photos, plus learning how to actually make money with your photography, I'm currently running a free photography masterclass that you can check out by hitting the link in the description below. It's 100% free and jam-packed with value, so definitely check that out if you're interested. Also, I'll be posting a lot of new videos to this channel, so if you want to stay up to date with all the new content coming, hit the like and subscribe button on your way out, and I'll see you in the next one.